Hi there. Hello, this is me. It's Moscow here, and this is Leedsista Libre, a free podcast in which I bring you a recording of something I wrote in the past and let you listen to it now. It's from 2020 today, although it's about a game from 1998. Isn't time interesting and weird? This is Thomas Brolin coming back into our lives very briefly at Selhurst Park when he was playing for Crystal Palace, and a bit of a eulogy for what could have been for Thomas Brolin if he'd arrived at Leeds with his ankles in the condition that they had been in before a match, a year before he came to Leeds, when pretty much his career ended with one of his best assists. So if you want to keep listening to what might have been about Thomas Brolin, keep listening. If you want to rush to leedsista.com and find out what's going on right now in 2026, on there you will find a match report about us beating Norwich in the FA Cup. You will also find an article about us playing Real Madrid away in the Champions League in 2001. Raul, handball, cheat. That's what you need to know in advance of checking that out. You will also find the latest in my list of players from A to Z since 1992, which is Danny Webber. Trust me, he's more interesting than you think, although there are a lot of names in that you, as a Leeds United fan, may not welcome. I'm going to whisper them quietly to you now. Neil Warnock, Gary Neville, that sort of thing. So if you want to skip it and just wait for next week, Darren Huckabee's coming. It's entirely up to you. I'm not going to criticise anyone for avoiding Neil Warnock, Gary Neville, and Danny Webber. But, Real Madrid's there if you want to read about that. And this is about Thomas Brolin, so let's just get on with Thomas Brolin.
On YouTube, you can watch the exact moment that Thomas Brolin's football career ended on November the 16th, 1994. He was playing for Sweden that night against Hungary in a Euro 96 qualifier in Stockholm. In other words, he was right at home. Parma was his club, but he didn't get top billing in Serie A. Gianfranco Zola and Faustino Asprilla occupied the forward positions, and his job now was to be a deep playmaker. He was brilliant at it, and his career in Italy earned him winners' medals in the Coppa Italia, European Cup Winners' Cup, European Super Cup and the UEFA Cup. But he had to be productive without being exuberant. His runs from midfield with the ball and vibrating with possibilities always ended with a pass to Zola or Asprilla, who would set up themselves or each other and take the headlines. Playing for Sweden was different. The national team had good players and big names: Martin Dahlin, Anders Limpar, Kenneth Andersson, Henrik Larsson, but Brolin had the free role and the limelight. In the 1990 World Cup, he scored against Brazil. At Euro 92, he was joint top scorer with 3, including the iconic goal he made against England with Dahlin's help. In the USA at the 1994 World Cup, Brolin scored another 3 and was picked for the All-Star team after Sweden finished 3rd. He was 24 and was voted Sweden's Footballer of the Year for the 2nd time. The team hadn't been fancied before World Cup 94, but Euro 96 now looked like an opportunity. Qualifying started with a win away to Iceland before a 4-2 defeat in Switzerland, but at home to Hungary a month later, Brolin put Sweden back on track. Just before half-time, spotting a weak defensive header, he sprang into the penalty area and, with a shuffle to set himself, controlled the ball on his knee and volleyed past the keeper in one split-second movement. A spinning air punch followed to celebrate, as it always did, and the replay showed the quick-thinking skill that warranted it. With 20 minutes left, Brolin turned creator for a second goal. He chipped the ball wide for Roland Nielsen, who followed Brolin's forward run with a pass into the penalty area. Brolin controlled and, after a slight pause while the ball bounced, span and hit a low cross that Dahlin couldn't miss at the back post. He'd built the goal from near the halfway line, and Dahlin, grinning, shrugged off Larsson because he wanted to congratulate Brolin. But something was wrong. As soon as he'd crossed, still spinning, Brolin's hand had stretched towards his foot. Now he was lying on his side on the grass. Larsson came to smack Brolin's backside, but Dahlin had looked at his face, heard his cries, looked at his ankle, and was up, waving frantically to the bench. An alert trainer was already coming, but Dahlin kept waving for more. Thomas needed help. As he twisted to cross, his standing ankle had twisted its own way, sliding beneath his leg as he showed the physio with a movement of his hand before burying his face in his arms again, which didn't do much to disguise his uncontrollable sobbing. While one trainer held the broken leg in place, another simply held Brolin as he lay crying. A stretcher was brought and a blanket, and Brolin was taken away, and that was that, in November 1994. The end. Of course, November 1995 took Brolin to Leeds, and the story of Brolin's post-injury purgatory in Yorkshire is well known. Perhaps it could have been a resurrection if Howard Wilkinson hadn't asked him to defend, if Brolin hadn't petulantly decided I was going to be piss poor in what ended up being a 5-0 defeat to Liverpool, if George Graham hadn't blown up a dispute with a player into a self-defeating imprisonment. Brolin was banned from Thorpe Arch and Elland Road, where he had to buy a ticket if he wanted to see the game, but his passport was locked in George Graham's office, so he couldn't get in and he couldn't get out. To Swedish customs officers, though, that cherubic face was all the passport they needed, but that only made Graham angrier. Wilkinson, said Brolin later, was an idiot who lied to him about where he would play. Wilkinson, for his part, says the whole thing was his fault, as it was the only time in his career he didn't trust his gut feeling, which was telling him not to go through with the transfer. But Brolin says Graham crossed the line into bullying. It was lucky I just decided to smile about the whole thing from the beginning, he said in 2012, otherwise I would have gone under as a person. Brolin signed in November 1995 and Graham was appointed in September 1996. It took until October 1997 for Brolin to extricate himself from Leeds. In January 1998 he was given a short-term contract with Crystal Palace, and his third game for them, when George Graham's Leeds came to Selhurst Park, was a chance to overturn opinions and prove some points. Instead, the match of the day cameras caught the end again. First, Brolin slumped in the grass again, then a bloody bandage. Brolin always claimed that ankle injury wasn't the end, that when he came back inside 6 months he was ahead of the doctor's schedule. But at Palace he was out of shape, and against Leeds he was out of luck. An innocuous clash of heads in the first few minutes had Bruno Ribeiro, arms outstretched, protesting apologetic innocence, and Brolin wiping the blood from his face as the game went on. It took a long time for him to stagger and fall, and to get up and walk to the doctor's room through the tunnel in the corner of Selhurst Park. "Bye bye, Fatty," sang the away fans. From the restart, Gary Kelly played a simple pass to Rod Wallace, and he shot through keeper Kevin Miller's legs to give Leeds a 7th-minute lead. 6 minutes later, Brolin hurried back along the touchline and out onto the pitch, clapping his hands and gritting his teeth and doing anything else he could to distract from the ludicrous picture the enormous bandage sealing his long blonde hair made of him. And Jimmy Hasselbank immediately made it 2 for Leeds, too strong for 2 defenders, too far out for anyone but him to aim for and find the far bottom corner. As so often with Hasselbank's goals, you didn't see it coming, but after it happened, it looked obvious. Brolin just looked bewildered. Wallace took the ball off him and Kelly aimed a clearance upfield on a trajectory straight through Brolin's head, sending the bandage flying off in one elasticated piece. The Match of the Day director soon had a camera zooming in on the stained cloth, the way the cameras had zoomed in on Brolin's tears when his ankle broke 3 years earlier, when none of these embarrassments or headaches were expected as part of the Swedish superstar's destiny. This time, the Palace physio stopped the blood with a plaster, but, his head pounding, a long afternoon of marking from Lucas Radeby ahead of him, Brolin just wanted to stop everything. George Graham had no sympathy. "I think he looked better when he had the lovely headband on," he joked after the game. "I wouldn't know if he was fit, because I've never seen him fit. I didn't see what happened when he got injured. I think one of his eyelashes got taken out." So much for the quips. Now for the hatchet job. There's too much hype surrounding this player. What's he done? He had a couple of good seasons at Parma and a good World Cup. Even then, Graham wasn't done. "I have no problem with Brolin," he claimed. "He had a problem with the previous manager." By the end of the season, Brolin said the impetus from joining Palace had left him. "By the end, it wasn't as fun anymore. I wondered, shall I do this next season?" He was only 28, but said later, If by the December of that year I'd wanted to play again, I would have come back. But that feeling never came, and now it's 20 years ago. Brolin continues, impressively, to live his life without regrets, proud of what he achieved as a player before moving on. But the YouTube clip of that fateful game against Hungary is a film of the regrets fans feel in his stead. It's 1 minute of Brolin at his brilliant best, and 4 minutes of injury and hurt. Maybe he was never the player for Wilkinson or Graham or Leeds, but he was some player, and then he wasn't.